Once upon a time, German manufacturer Schwarzkopf created Thriller. It would operate in 4 different countries and was one of the most acclaimed traveling coasters of all time. But as of today, it sits unused and in pieces in Mexico. But how could such an amazing creation meet what's likely to be a bitter end? Let's learn more about it today on Theme Park Crazy. Now let's go back to the mid-1980s, when coaster legend Anton Schwarzkopf's steel coasters were extremely popular at German fun fairs. These attractions were sold to showmen, who would regularly transport them from fair to fair. These portable coasters were specifically designed to be taken apart and put back together on a regular basis. Some of the company's most famous traveling coasters at the time include Alpinabahn, J Looping, and the wonderfully bizarre Catapult model. Suffice to say, Schwarzkopf was on top of the fairground world. Behind the scenes though, things weren't looking so great for the company. Though Anton Schwarzkopf was a brilliant ride designer, he admittedly lacked business skills, and his company would face bankruptcy several times. By the end of the 80s, Schwarzkopf would shut down his manufacturing company and would stick to designing rides for other companies. Just before shutting down though, his company would manufacture one last coaster. This would be a massive looping roller coaster meant for fairgrounds. This coaster would be named Thriller, and it would be the company's magnum opus. You could say it was one last hurrah before the manufacturer shut down. Owned by showman Oscar Bruch, Thriller would make its debut on May 17, 1986 at Freiburg, Germany's fairground. Starting off with a curved drive tire lift, passengers would be taken 110 feet into the air. Following the lift hill was a brief pre-drop, which would serve as a transition into the main drop. This curved drop was said to have a steepness of around 70 degrees, which was extremely impressive for the time. Immediately succeeding the drop was one of the coaster's main features, a pair of concentric vertical loops. These loops stood side by side instead of front to back like on other Schwarzkopf coasters. After the star inversions, the train would be sent upwards into an unusual banked block brake section before another curved drop. After an exciting near-miss segment through the support structure, the trains would hit the third loop, which was directly in front of the previous ones. The symmetrical placement of the loops was quite pleasing to the eye, and it was further proof of Schwarzkopf's engineering prowess. Shortly afterwards, passengers would reach the final inversion, a small 48-foot vertical loop that the trains would race into. This was said to be the most forceful part of the ride. After a few more bank turns, the coaster would come to an end. From the moment it opened, Thriller was absolutely mind-blowing. The tightness of the loops combined with the speed of the ride vehicles led this inversion to exert a measured 6.5 Gs onto the riders. That's over 6 times the force of gravity. This G-force was only matched by Moonsault Scramble at Japan's Fuji-Q Highland. It was so astronomically intense that several fairs allegedly opted not to seat the back cars over guest comfort concerns. Naturally, this was due to the ride's forces hitting the back row the hardest. Moreover, the ride's lap bar restraint system had to be modified with shoulder pads due to its high forces. Overall, Thriller was an instant hit in the fair circuit, and it would travel all across Germany in the 80s and 90s. At one point, it would even operate at famous Swedish amusement park Grönalund for the 1996 season. But just 1 year after its run at Grönalund, the ride's run in the fair circuit would come to a halt. In 1998, Six Flags Astroworld in Houston, Texas was celebrating its 30th birthday, and park officials wanted to add a major attraction for the occasion. Six Flags would end up purchasing the coaster from the fair circuit in late 1997, and it was promptly shipped across the Atlantic to Houston. First debuting on March 14, 1998, Thriller would be renamed to Taz's Texas Tornado. The ride took its name after the world-famous spin-happy Looney Tunes character, the Tasmanian Devil. It was quite a fitting name, considering the coaster's first 3 loops form what looked like a spinning spiral effect, though it would be renamed to simply Texas Tornado the next year. The ride would be well received by enthusiasts, with many saying it was a great way to celebrate 30 years of Astroworld. Unfortunately, it wouldn't be long before this coaster was closed down. Having originated in Europe, the coaster wasn't built for the scorching hot Texas weather. As a result, it faced numerous mechanical issues, especially on its drive tire lift hill. So much so that an extra anti-rollback mechanism had to be added to the lift. In the year 2000, its issues would lead to the ride's closure for 2 whole years. During this time of standing but not operating, new trains were built for the attraction. With Anton Schwarzkopf retiring in the mid-90s, 1930s, his son's company Wieland Schwarzkopf would be in charge of the redesign. These new trains would be shown off at the 2000 IAPA Expo. The new design would trade the lap bars and shoulder pads with bulkier over-the-shoulder restraints. Despite these new trains though, they would never actually get to be used in Texas. By 2002, it was decided to relocate the coaster northward to another park in the chain. The exact reasoning behind the relocation is unknown, but it was widely speculated to be to avoid the Texas climate. Soon enough, it was decided to move the attraction to Six Flags Marine World in Vallejo, California. This time, it would be renamed once again to Zonga, which is the Swahili word for coil. At the time of its opening, it was hyped up considerably by the company.
Looking for some new seriously twisted coaster thrills? The only place you'll find them is on Zonga. The steepest 1, 2, 3, 4 loop mega coaster in the world. Seriously intense. And a serious deal. $15 off with a coupon from Burger King. But most of all, it's seriously twisted. Zonga. The newest addition to the greatest coaster arsenal in Northern California. Six Flags Marine World. Bring in your Burger King coupon for $15 off.
Before Zonga opened in 2003, it would undergo even more modifications. In addition to the new trains already purchased, Six Flags hired American manufacturer Premier Rides to make modifications to the track. More specifically, they made the drop shorter and the first 2 loops taller, thus decreasing its speed and its famous G-forces. The trains were also shortened from 6 to 5 cars. These adjustments were intended to make the ride less forceful and more comfortable to riders. Additionally, most of the track was repainted to a brilliant blue, and to be honest, it never looked better. On the contrary, according to guests at the time, it never rode worse either. The new trains were said to be cramped and uncomfortable, and the over-the-shoulder restraints made the transitions especially painful. The experience would best be compared to Burger King's now-defunct Shake 'em Up fries, but instead of the fries colliding with the seasoning, passengers' heads would collide with the restraints. Not only was the modified coaster reportedly terrible, but none of these updates improved its reliability. After just 2 seasons of operation, Zonga would be shut down for good. Coincidentally enough, it would also stay standing but not operating for 2 years before its removal. This time around, Six Flags opted not to send the coaster to another one of their parks. Instead, they decided to put it up for sale. Shortly thereafter, it would end up being acquired by the San Marcos National Fair in Aguascalientes, Mexico. It would be 4 years after its closure until the coaster finally reopened on April 27, 2008. The color scheme would remain the same, but the coaster would be renamed for a 5th time to Tsunami. For the next few years, this coaster would operate seasonally as an A-list attraction on the Midway. The seasonal operation likely made the ride much easier to maintain, putting less stress on its components. However, it's not confirmed how reliable it was in Mexico. For around 5 or 6 years, Tsunami would stand tall on the fairgrounds, being visible in nearby neighborhoods. Unfortunately, sometime around 2014, this coaster would go into standing but not operating mode for a 3rd and perhaps final time. Just like its first 3 loops, this coaster repeated history 3 times. Park acquires it, Park sells it, rinse, and repeat. The coaster was taken down in order to make way for a Lienzo Charo Arena complex. This is a facility where equestrian, bull riding, and rodeo events are held. Since the fair was owned by the Aguascalientes government, officials decided that the ride wasn't profitable enough to keep around. It sadly wasn't bringing in enough crowds to offset its high maintenance costs. Officials would keep the coaster in storage on the property and would spend 3 years trying to sell it. At one point, Germany's Skyline Park expressed interest in acquiring the coaster. However, this deal would end up falling through. European Union building standards meant that it couldn't be installed as it was, and the adjustments needed to bring it up to those standards were far too costly. Perhaps the final nail in the coffin came in 2019, when the Aguascalientes government announced the coaster's disincorporation from the public domain. In other words, the government was unable to find a buyer, so they are looking to get rid of the ride. At this point, the government is willing to do anything with the coaster in order to recover the money invested in it. As of March 2020, it still sits on the property, and whether it will be moved to another storage location or scrapped entirely is unknown. But as of right now, it is unlikely to open up anytime soon. Indeed, the story of Thriller started with a bang, and it will likely end with a whimper. Regardless of its ultimate fate, though, this ride deserves a place in coaster history as among the most intense and revolutionary attractions of all time. Thank you all so much, and if you want to support me on Patreon, I put a link in the description. And a special shout out to Raider from Ohio. Thanks for watching, everyone. Feel free to like, share, and subscribe. You can follow me on social media on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or you can check out my website at themeparkcrazy.com. This is Theme Park Crazy, and I'll see you all next time.